tonight's Orkney Archaeology Society talk. I'm Hayley Whitman, the Secretary of the Society. I wouldn't normally chair this, but unfortunately David, who is our chair, hasn't been able to make it, and Moira is away, who's our Vice Chair. So it's fallen to me to introduce you to this evening's talk. I'm not going to say very much at all. At the end of the talk we will have time for questions. There'll be a few announcements at that point as well. But what I'm absolutely delighted to do tonight is to introduce you to four speakers, which I think is the first time we've had multiple speakers, or certainly for quite a while, at an event. So we're going to be starting off with Alex Leonard, who's going to be talking us basically through the process around the design of the characters that he designed for the Archaeology Society. I think it's probably a couple of years ago or so that we first approached you about the idea. But as you will listen, Alex was very busy and very, very big order. So we have been working with Alex to get these characters designed in such a way that they're not only got the absolute kind of joy of Alex's character. I think those of us who are in will absolutely recognise the kind of the life that kind of comes through with them, but also that they are as authentic as they can be based on the archaeological evidence that we have available to do that. So in order to do that, Alex worked with four kind of groups of archaeologists, but in the main we have three of them here. So we have Martin Carruthers, who worked with Alex on the Iron Age character. We've got Dr. Queen Beatty, who worked with Alex on the Viking character. And we've got Andrew Holmgren, who worked with Alex on the 20th century character. We don't have anybody to speak about the Neolithic character because, strangely, everybody involved in the Neolithic work was kind of quite tired at the moment. Not really up for a late night, which I think is a bit shoddy, all things considered. Nevertheless, we do have a good range of folk in the room, and also Alex, I know you'll be able to say a little bit about the work you did with. I think it was mainly Nick that you worked with. Yeah, it was Nick that worked on the archaeology, the Neolithic girl, as we call her. So without any further ado, I'll pass you on to Alex, and then at the end of the talk, like I say, there'll be time for Q&A, and also we've got a couple of announcements for that. So I hope you have a really good evening, and I shall go and whip up some raffle tickets. So thank you very much. The raffle will be at the end.
Hello everyone. Hi, yes, I'm Alex. I don't often stand and talk at things, but when I do, I generally open with the gambit of, you probably know me from the Giddy Leonard, which is, fairly staple. That's everybody's first go-to. But the reality of it is that I do actually have a full job, and I draw other things outside of a Monday afternoons when I do the Giddy Limit, and kind of this is where my love lies in terms of character design and concept art, and this has been a really good project to be part of. It did take me a long time to free myself up to be part of it, but I'm really glad that I did, and I'm really proud of the work that we all managed to put together. But four characters, four eras. In terms of time tonight, I don't really have time to go in detail into all four of them. And in terms of what I personally am going to cover, I don't really think there's any point in me discussing the hows and the whys about what was decided. I can just point the finger at these experts over here and say that they told me to do these things. But I am joking, obviously, but I'm going to really focus on, I guess, the creative process that I go through, not just in producing these characters, but it's actually a process for all the work that I do. And actually, because I produce everything digitally, I'm going to take you through a little bit of the technical process of how I achieve them as well. So, I figured that was probably the best use of time. So, I'm going to just talk for literally 2 minutes about what my actual job is. Not to mean to sound indulgent about it, or to have a need to show you the other kind of work that I do, but I think in order for you to best understand the way that I approach my work, you have to understand how work is done in the industry that I work in. So I also am a complete PC phobe, I'm a Mac person, so if this explodes or something, then okay, good. Okay, so my actual title, my job is I'm a concept artist and a character designer at Alt Animation Studio, and they're a pretty small but thriving animation studio based over in Northern Ireland. As I said, I don't do these talks very often, but I usually make this one joke because I quite like it. But they're actually based in Hollywood, with one L, and it's just outside Belfast. But if you just say Hollywood to people, then it does a better job in terms of making people sit up and listen. But yeah, I'm a concept artist and a character designer at the studio. So what does that mean? Well, really, it's about, excuse me as I get my notes here, it's sometimes known as visual development as well, but fundamentally all of these projects that you see here, they're projects that the studio have produced and I've worked on all of these. But really it's just a big part of any studio's day to day or week to week is constantly come up with new ideas for productions and shows and ideas, concepts, if you like, to see where this is going. And they have a very finite amount of time to try and pitch those ideas to basically distributors, broadcasters, partners, the big guys with the money that come in and finance these projects. And quite often it is just in the form of, possibly it might be a sample script, and we might have a quick document to put together, but really that's where my job comes in, is trying to sell those ideas and get to the heart of what those projects are about, what the target audience is, the kind of themes they're going to cover, what target audience and the aesthetic. Every show wants to try and be different, whether that's a really young kids show, as you can see these kind of things, up to sort of like more mature content productions as well. So that's my job. This is kind of what I would call concept art. This will come back around to being relevant, please trust me. But this is the kind of thing, this was a sci-fi show that we're working on at the moment. It's actually only working with Jason and the Argonauts, believe it or not. So, but this is the kind of stuff that gets produced. So it's actually sometimes referred to as speed painting as well. So it's done really quite quickly. I probably wouldn't spend more than 2 or 3 hours on any one of these images. It's done and then it's gone. You'll get a little bit of feedback about it from whoever you're working with. Change the colour of hair, change this, can we change its ethnicity, I like the size of this, but can we have this one and that one, and all of that kind of stuff. And so it moves along at a fair old pace. But that is really what concept art is about. I've read the script, I've probably been briefed by the director, and then we start producing the actual art. So this is more for the same project. This is a more mature kind of audience that we're aiming for here, but this example down the right here is exactly the kind of, this is very common, 3 different sets of facial tattoos for this guy. He has no nose, but that's a whole other story. But this is the kind of thing, and you go through iterations, it comes back, you change things, you try different things. And so really the point of sharing all this is that any of these projects, the working digitally means that you can change things very quickly and very easily, and you have to have a workflow that is efficient, and that any kind of request to change anything doesn't really knock things sideways, and you can fold it in. So I couldn't go any further without sharing at least some of the images from, we do have a project in production at the moment based in Leonard, Orkney, so I won't just show that because I felt like it was appropriate. But again, this is the kind of idea. And if you do compare it to don't like these things. If you look back in terms of the aesthetic, this is a much more sort of grown-up comic book kind of approach. I know there's not any characters here, but it has a more sort of, although the subject matter actually looks fairly intimidating, it has that kind of like younger slant to it, because that is the target audience. Here are some character designs for the same show. And this is exactly the same kind of process that I used when I produced these guys. So the guys for the OAS. So I just wanted to share the pendulum really swinging the other way here, but these are designs for a show that we did with a company over in Canada, which is obviously skewed at a very young audience. They wanted a sort of 1930s aesthetic to the main character, who was a kid that had a clown family, but he went to a regular school. And so these are all variations based on doing some sketches, getting some feedback, coming back, and changing a little bit every time. And the one at the end here is how we ended up. This is typical feedback that you would get. We like this, but we don't like this. Let's make Karen Hispanic with her hair, what does it say? With latte coloured skin, just a bit darker. Change the head on this, swap it over there. We like these legs, but we prefer this. Yeah, so that is the process, back and forth all the time. So what I thought I'd do, as I say, I can't go into the detail on every character, but I thought because we don't have a representative of the Neolithic here, and it probably is the area that I feel probably most comfortable talking in. I've done a wee bit of work in that area before. I thought I would take you through that. So my first port of call is obviously just gathering reference images. I use Pinterest, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. There are other softwares that do pretty much the same job, but at this stage it's really just creating, when interior designers get a mood board for a room together, it's sort of that. And if you can make out, am I standing in a okay place? It's as much taking account of very obvious sort of hard evidence, if you like. So there's stuff in there. There's the Scarabray necklace that we know we wanted to include. There's actual Neolithic shoes that they used as a reference for when we did the shoes on the girl. But as much as that, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that really interests me. And actually, up in this top corner here, the 4 girls that you see, well, there's actually 3 girls. This head tilt and this kind of look as if kind of looking down the camera instantly spoke to me. I don't know why. I don't know why it did, but in this instance, when I was like, what is this character going to be doing? That is the thing over and above, whether that's right for a historical piece of artwork, whether it's right or not, that was the thing that really spoke to me, and I just kind of took things from there. You'll see as well there's references in here that are used that are not historically accurate stuff. It's stuff from fashion shoots, it's from games and movie productions. And as well, there's little, you might see the cartoon figures in the middle. I always try and remind myself of the kind of aesthetic that I'm aiming for as well, because it's really easy to get drawn. Particularly when you're working on something that has a real need to be based in real life, you can end up becoming a little bit prescriptive. And I don't really like producing art that looks like it's lifelike. I like things to look a little bit caricatured, as we kind of said at the beginning there. So that was the first protocol. That now then gets narrowed down into pieces that become fundamental to the character that I'm designing. So again, the expression in the head tilt here, you might recognise as being key. Some of Chris's artwork here on the rock, in terms of just looking at the colours that I probably wanted to represent. I did know that they were represented, obviously, within the nest itself as well. There's artwork from Sesame, I think, as well, which we'll come to next. Came back to that. This image of the bag. So when I can't be bothered to flip back to the actual image, but she's carrying this pouch. I'm going to hands up say I can't remember where I got that image from, but it was given to me by an archaeologist, therefore it's absolutely fine. But it was given by, his name has escaped me now, Matt Ritchie, the Forestry Commission. Yeah, I've worked with him on some other projects, and it was actually on one of his projects that he gave this, and I just really loved that item, and so that went in. This reconstruction from the museum in Sweden, I just thought was absolutely amazing, and you can see that it was quite influential as well. So those are the inspiration, and it comes out first as this really underwhelming sketch This was the very first thing that I submitted to these guys. This is a bit like exposing your soul here, by the way, showing a rough sketch like this. But that's how it started. It's really difficult at this stage to really garner any kind of detail for the recipient, but it's just sort of, I suppose, it was sort of gestural at this stage, and I was saying I quite fancy having her in this quite sort of relaxed, but defiant pose. They then moved on with some conversation from Nick into here, adding a bit of colour and trying to get to the bottom of what exactly might it be that she was wearing. And it was at this point that Nick said that, why is she wearing a miniskirt? Which I thought was a pretty good call. It was actually supposed to be a tunic that was just melted, but I'd drawn it really badly. So that was some really good feedback, so that went in as well. But it was at this point that really, he highlighted Cecily's work. That was a terrible picture of it down there in the bottom corner. That was just really full of colour. And that really resonated with Nick. I was going to go down much more, just keep it to, very plain looking textiles and skins. But he was all about, making it as colourful as possible. And so this is what we ended up with over here. So that is the creative process side of it. How are we doing on time here? I thought I would just take you through the technical side of it. So from these guys in the middle here, first port of call is to produce a really cleaned up, sorry, it's really sensitive keyboard, it just keeps touching. Anyway, a line drawing, and then at that point, purely flat and local colour goes in underneath that. So here I'm just picking up literally colour of here, colour of the top. I am being a little vague here in terms of, is this a skin or is this a textile? And I'm pointing at both trousers and tunic here, but in a way that is kind of deliberate. I think sometimes with concept art, or any kind of illustration really, sometimes leaving questions is as important as being very specific and answering them. And I know the textiles have, evidence of textiles have been discovered at the nest, so I was keen to try and get that in there somehow. On top of that, then now we're starting to get into the detail, and this is where Nick was really keen to get into some actual, some of the designs from we can see on at the nest at Broadgar. Obviously, Antonia's done such an amazing amount of work on that, and I will read nearly everything that she writes because I just find it so fascinating. And so taking those, what are now very famous geometric patterns, would they have painted them onto their skins in this way? I can't answer that, I'm not an archaeologist. However, what I do know is that it was really important from here that even if you're viewing this image really small, be that on a mug or a tissue or whatever, that those graphics were very visible and instantly recognisable, because for me, at the moment, nothing says Orkney as much as these geometric designs. She actually has tattoos on her arm that are the same patterns that are on the edges of an awful lot of the stones that have been found there as well. Nick loved this, so we went with it, is basically the bottom line. So after the detail, the next layer that goes in here is, I guess we'd call it ambient light, or very sort of soft shadows. You're really just trying to pick out form at this point and give the image a bit of depth. What it means is that if at any point I want to go back and change the colour of her trousers or her hair or anything, I can do it on this layer, and it remains completely unaffected on this layer, and the shadows would apply. God bless Photoshop, it is amazing. And then from there, this is where artists prefer this stuff. Now we're getting some direct light, and you really start to carve out some form and shape that you're starting to come out of the page a little bit more. And theoretically, at this point, you can pick whatever light scenario you want in terms of colour, which direction it's coming from, as you can see if I toggle between them. So no direct light, and then different setups of direct light there. One more to go, and it was the last one, which is just another light source, but in my head, actually all the characters have this as well. It's because I started with a Neolithic one. but it is obviously supposed to convey firelight. But it just did a really good job, I think, of warming up the character as well. But if you do look, it maybe doesn't make quite as much sense with a 20th century guy. Well, I guess it could have been an oil lamp or something. But yeah, so that is the process. And I just thought we would have some zoomed in images of it. There's lots of shoes. And there's her shoes. And then I have a whole bunch of other stuff, but I think in terms of time, that is good. So yeah, that is the process. That is a snapshot of me working on the Kieran's character. This is what my desktop or my document in Photoshop will look like as I'm working. So you'll see that I, similar to the way that I got the Pinterest board together, I use myself as a model a lot of that image. That's me holding something by way of, sometimes you can look for all your life on Google Images and you don't quite find the hand that you want, and you realise if I just taken a photograph an hour ago, this would be a whole lot. So I often do that. These, obviously, the incredibly buff guy in the with the leather apron on there is not for any reference other than I was really interested in how light bounced off of polished leather in that way, so that's in there. What does new? What would the men look like if it was new? That's in there for just to get a colour reference and the hairstyles. And there's a similar way in the document working with a 20th century character. That is me pretending that 2 beer cans are pure because I don't know. And like I say, I'm not going to get into specifics of the characters, we simply just don't have time, but there is a little iteration of 3 versions of what ended up becoming the end guy, but I'm sure these guys will speak to all that. So I think I will leave it at that point. I feel like that was a brain dump, but thank you for listening. I think,
That must be left from the last time I spoke to the society. The old one, that one, there's about 90 slides in that one. This is the one we want. 3 slides you'll be glad to hear. Yeah, so I got involved in the project certainly much more recently than the last couple of years. It was well on the way when we asked what planning out their kind of their set of graphical characters across the periods, across the 4 periods that we've trailed so far, what we've thought to do so far. And it was really very much that kind of iterative process that Alex has described, and it was a really interesting process as well. So one of the things I want to talk about is how novel that was for me, because often I don't get people bouncing off me quite that same way when you're discussing ideas. And you work with students all the time, work with colleagues all the time, but they're already to some extent embedded in archaeology in one way or another, either as novices or aspirational archaeologists or fully blooded archaeologists in that sense. And that's a healthy thing to talk to people outside of archaeology in that sense. That's what I'm trying to convey, I guess. And it's a little bit, I think it's a little bit like the benefits of experimental archaeology, at least to the extent that it makes someone like me think harder about the realities and the physicalities of what it is that I'm spending all the time digging up and thinking about. But in some ways, quite an abstract way within archaeology, detailing things in a particular manner, using typologies and classifications and categorizations that are well known and well understood within the discipline, but trying to communicate and convey those out with the kind of people who are already initiated into that world is very healthy for me. I think that's me that benefits from that process far more than Alex, for example, will hopefully get benefited from some of the guidance as well in terms of things you find. So I just wanted to say those things initially, just very quickly, and there's a Iron Age character. And it's quite early on in the process that it was decided that of the types of people, the categories of person that this person could be, that a metal worker would be the one to go for the Iron Age and for this, to draw in the material from the cairns. And here's the cairn site itself that we're currently excavating, big, complex, multi-period site that runs over hundreds of years during the Iron Age and well beyond the Iron Age as well. And the material evidence from there, thousands of artefacts and all sorts of other materials and objects that give us, on the one hand, a very graphic understanding, a very clear understanding of what material was available and was used, the raw materials, the finished items, the working processes that were undertaken. So we've got a very strong sense of that. And we could have gone in all sorts of different directions. There's some amazing artefacts we could have used in a different kind of category of person. You know, we could have focused on beautiful glass beads, or we could have focused on shell and shale personal adornments. We could have looked at other types of tools. We could have looked at somebody grinding grain. We could have thought about a pastoralist, herding cattle, etc. But quite quickly the decision was made to, at least at this stage, focus on a metalworker. So that's, and I think that's very appropriate for the Iron Age as well, very much an appropriate thing to focus on the metallurgical side of things. So, final slide for me, but I'll talk a little bit about it, if you'll indulge me for a few more moments, was just to think about what kinds of evidence we had from the cairns. And again, in that iterative sense, you know, Alex produced a few mock-ups and a few kind of early versions and iterations of it, and thinking about, does it look like this? Should you look like this? What do the tongs look like? And initially the tongs were quite elaborate, and I just said, well, the only tongs we've really got is this incredibly unprepossessing object on the lower left there that looks like I sort of think what it looks like actually, and what it really is just a piece of folded over iron. And it's broken off at the business angle effectively, and it's just the simplest tongs. It's like coal tongs, it's like handling coal round a hearth. That's all that really is. But that is an object from the cairns, from the relevant period, that appears to be a kind of a tong-like piece of apparatus. So then in the finished item, that's what we go with. And then the pet boulder that our Iron Age character is carrying around with it, or dragging around almost like a ball and chain. The boulder, as simple as it looks, in the top left there, is the most heavy-duty stone angle that we have on site, and it's been absolutely bashed on its top surface. It's discoloured, it's stained, it's got probably metallurgical materials actually almost hammered into the thing, as well as it's shearing off and it's laminating on the top. And the most important thing is that contextually it was associated with big metalworking unit on site, so we can be pretty confident that's an anvil. But it's a very simple object. It's just a massive beach cobble that's been fetched up from the seashore and just planted down and utilised as an incredibly heavy-duty anvil. And then on the right, finally, these particular cairns objects, two fragments from a very particular type of filed clay mould for making ring-headed pins. So beautiful in their own right. We found over 60 fragments of these types of moulds from an area actually adjacent to and contemporary with that massive anvil stone, and where we have evidence for heavy-duty ferrous metalworking and non-ferrous metalworking, copper alloy working, jewellery making effectively, much finer work than the kind of thing you'd use for the anvil. But we know these things were happening in conjunction. May have been the same metal workers. They may have been very fine jewellery making on the one hand at one moment, and the next minute beating the absolute hell out of sheet metal, or more likely perhaps forging iron. So a real mixture of ferrous and non-ferrous metalworking that's informing the kind of the guise, the form, the traits of our metalworker. And so I'm used to looking at ethnographies and anthropological pictures of jewellery makers in places like Nepal. They're actually quite wily, quite fine guys. You know, and there is you could almost say it's a cliche that metalwork is like blacksmiths with huge arms and all the rest of it. But actually, the metalworker that's going on at the cairns at any rate is a mixture of both of those things, where you wouldn't need big upper body strength even for just moving the apparatus around. Never mind the hours and hours that you might spend on actually working and forging these iron materials, but then interspersed with much finer tinkering around, as it were, with the copper alloy work. So that's a character, and that's a result of it. And I think it's splendid, I think it's really cool, I think it's amazing. The clothing, you know, I think a lot of the archaeologists would say this, we get more of a sense of clothing from the proxy evidence of the objects that are worn on the clothing in conjunction with clothing, dress fasteners and the rest, so that's probably even more the case with your Viking period character. Certainly for the Iron Age also, there are fugitive traces of clothing. We get secondary evidence from textile production materials. We know that there are huge numbers of cattle on site at the cairns, and many of them are being raised, it would seem, for meat and milk, but probably also for their skins and their hides, etc. So leather absolutely would have been available to the Iron Age metal workers on site. So that's where we have it, and I won't say too much more than that at this stage, and I'll pass on to others. But I just want to thank Alex for such an interesting, refreshing and novel experience for an archaeologist like me.
Okay, so thank you very much so far. It's been a really, really interesting process, as Martin has explained. And what I want to talk about is a little bit about the evidence that we have in relation to putting together the Viking figure. Now, I'm very unhelpfully not included an image in detail here for the picture which we have used, but just to remind you, she has a raft of beautiful reddish hair. She has black eyebrows, so they're not matching. So presumably, those of you who've got a lighter colouring will recognise this, that she's probably used soot in her eyebrows. She has a long blue dress, a bright blue dress with an underskirt, a pair of brooches she wears here, necklace of beautiful beads, leather shoes, and she's working with a spindle. So that's the image that we need to portray. Of course, you know, Vikings are always considered to be kind of sexy Hollywood type of images. If you go to Scandinavia, you might well see a lot of blonde people, but actually, you know, it's not particularly a fantastic kind of a visual that you get. But I put these two images here because obviously we've used the female, the Viking female. And this is the very fantastical image of a Viking female here, a Hollywood image, really completely unrealistic, but never mind. And the guy on the left-hand side. We don't have a guy at this stage, but we may well have at some point. But the crucial thing is that we need to remember when we're, as archaeologists, that we're dealing with people. And that often gets forgotten. And we also need to remember that it's a colourful time in the past, not a black and white time, just because we tend to find fragments of textiles which are pale brown or leached out. And so it's a very good reminder to see on the image where you've got the blue overshirt. I think that's really good. You can see some of the more modern recreations based on archaeological finds for people with costumes here. These are from Stockholm, from Björkö near Stockholm, and they were found in graves. And most of our evidence that we can use that helps to sort out the evidence that we can synthesize to put on images, as we've seen, to simplify them, comes from grave evidence. In fact, it all comes from grave evidence. So I've tended to focus in terms of, we're working with Alexander the 9th and the 10th centuries AD, because there we've got really good pagan burials, which give us, throughout the Viking world, which give us a really good insight into the kind of clothing, the kind of jewellery, and the fugitive evidence which survives for us from some of those aspects. So I just wanted to, just quite briefly, just take you through one or two little things to try and explain how we can answer the question is, how can I portray that? What is the evidence for that? There are always things you don't know, always. And I think that, as archaeologists, we're blatantly aware of that for everything that we do. But there are things that we do know, and I think by pulling those things together, you can actually get a really good image. It may not be 100% accurate, but as far as we're concerned just now, it's as best we can do. So the image that we have here shows this massive cemetery in Sweden, Birka, thousands of graves, and each of them were pagan graves, which means that people were buried with grave goods and with clothing, and that's the crucial thing here. There are lots of different images that we can take out of that, the recreated images obviously here. We've got the same get-up as we have in the portrayal of the Viking girl on the merchandise. But she has the addition here of some tablet weaving at the bottom of her shirt, a pinafore, but you can also see quite clearly that she's got these oval brooches which are worn on the clavicles, and most importantly this great string of beads. Now these of course all survive. The metal parts of that survive really quite well in the archaeological record, and there are a number of graves which have been, which give us that information. If you just take this example on the left-hand side, this is from that cemetery. Here you can see a recreation, obviously, of a lady who was buried in a chamber grave here. She has a whole range of metal elements, including a staff and strap ends and so on, as well as brooches and beads, etc. Things in her hair to hold her hair back. And all of these grave goods, they tell a lot about the way of life, but they also tell us even more about the way of death and the rituals associated with that. You see the recreation on the right-hand side, you get again the same impression. So we're constantly coming to the same conclusions, that the main element of female clothing that we can see at this period is as described in the merchandise and as described in Alex's work. So it's really quite a good evidence that we can use for recreating these characters in this period. We've got evidence of leather shoes. Obviously these are modern recreations on the left, but leather shoes, so she didn't have to walk around in her flip-flops. We've got bone pins, which would have been used to fasten back the hair, and these often survive in situ. And we've got spindle whorls, of course, many, many spindle whorls. The one thing we don't tend to find very often are the spindles, and those of you who are interested in textile working will know that that's absolutely fundamental. We do have them, but then they don't tend to survive very well. But the cloth itself is something which does survive in some certain circumstances. And you've got here this twill fragment here. It's not very exciting, I'd be the very first to admit it. But what you have to realise is it's been in the ground for God knows how many hundreds of years. And it's really would have probably have had a colour to it when it was placed in the ground. This part of an item of clothing. The modern recreation of the tablet weaving on the right, that incorporates silk thread, and is a reminder that in the textiles that we have represented in the Viking Age, particularly in Scotland, Scandinavia, and also evidenced in Orkney, where we can see that we've got this really a good variety of decorative elements, and that's important because, of course, we like decoration. The Orkney population loves decoration, is particularly creative, and there's no reason at all why in the past that wasn't the case, and we've got good evidence for that. I'm not going to talk for very much longer, but simply just to point out the brooch that we've got here, one of the oval brooches, one of those from the collarbone. Here you can see it, the drawing on the back side of it is where the pin was. The brooch itself is made of bronze, of copper alloy. It's quite a complicated piece of jewellery, but we don't need to go into that particularly. But simply on the back, you've got an iron pin. And this is really crucial because the textiles which were brought together by these brooches are actually then caught up in the corrosion. And so we can see that there was a pleating of the underskirt. And we can see that there were straps which were joined by the brooch. So a strap at the top, strap that came over the shoulder. We've got evidence of that. We may not have too much detail of it, but we do have that particularly. The example on the right is one from Orkney, and it's just a reminder that we see these very, very commonly. These are from the Isle of Man, but they could be anywhere in the Viking world. Now, interestingly, I excavated a grave in Shetland which had vocal brooches on the back. It had this pleated silk. It also had skin. So in the future, we'll be able to get very much more information out of that. The beads, and the penultimate image here, the beads are really significant because they are tokens, if you like, of people's travels. They are really almost like an autograph book. It's the only way I can describe it. And they're beautiful and pretty. They become heirlooms, and they are, they're characterful. So the images that we can see here, the top left, obviously recreated examples from Ribe in Denmark. It gives you variety there. The ones on the right, you can see these segmented beads, and we do find these in Orkney. We've got one from some of my excavations. And here on the bottom, we've got these polychrome beads. Some of these beads come from as far away as Istanbul. Okay, so this is why I say it's like holiday souvenirs almost, and it's really, really an important part of the evidence that we have for recreating these costumes. I put this one just on finally. These are recreations, obviously, but these are just reminders that we have colour. And these are actually from Greenland, and the costumes themselves, the originals, survived remarkably well because of the permafrost. This is what we're missing. We don't have that. We have to go with proxy elements, just as Martin described. But I think, the more proxy elements you have, the more you can make a good stab at recreating a figure. So that's really all I wanted to say in relation to the Vikings, and I'd like to just hand over to my colleague, Andy. Thank you.
Right, good evening everybody. I'm Andrew Hollenrick, and like Martin was saying, I think I came into the process well after some decisions had been made, including the decision to have a military figure to represent the 20th century. And I think everyone will probably recognise that one of the most profound things to affect Orkney in the 20th century was the two world wars. Surely, just the sheer influx of people. And maybe just explain why we've gone for this particular figure, this particular uniform, and explain exactly what the uniform is as well. Now, in the First World War, there would have been far more armed service personnel in Orkney, but actually not many of them on land so much. The Grand Fleet, based in Scandaflow, would have been about 100,000 sailors, mostly afloat. Of course, they did come ashore, and they were carefully confined to mostly flotter and line nests, where most of their recreational facilities were. Probably could move to keep them out of the town. So, in terms of the day-to-day lives and the sort of what you'd encounter as an Orcadian pedestrian, your life would be profoundly affected by restriction of trade and travel. But you probably wouldn't have actually bumped into that many naval personnel. There were defences on land, not nearly so many as the Second World War. So, and what we have here is a gunner from the Second World War, and that's probably the most heavily represented unit in the Orkney defences in the Second World War. And you might think that, again, with it being a naval base in the Second World War, that the Navy, a sailor, might be a better choice. But I think I can kind of justify the choice of the Army here. And I have to confess to a fairly substantial bias towards that side of it. Even though my father was a naval officer, of course, I spent a lot of my time doing the guided tours at Ness Battery. And this is pretty much the uniform you would have seen there. I think it's also a good choice in terms of actual Orcadians as well, because an awful lot of them served as gunners in both World Wars, but going right back to the Napoleonic Wars and even earlier, local men serving in the artillery, the Orkney Artillery Volunteers, the Orkney Royal Garrison Artillery in the First World War. But of course, far more on land in the Second World War, just the sheer weight of defences on land, much more threat of air attack, of course. I did a graphic here which I'll now fire up, and just a rough guide. You can kind of see the outline of the islands. The image underneath the map is actually from a 1943 document, and of course, representing the 20th century, I did have the advantage of referring to actual documents and photographs, because of a bit of an unfair advantage, I guess. But so yeah, 1943 plan of the defences. Now superimposed lots of dots, and the red dots are army establishments. The blue ones are navy. It's a little bit fuzzy actually, but you can see a few light blue ones for the RAF. Now I've missed quite a few detailed sites, and I put one great big blue blob on Linus. Linus alone would have been about 10 or 12,000 naval personnel. So I'm cheating a little bit, but just to show you how far more widespread the army personnel. So you're more likely to bump into a soldier than a sailor, is my point here really. So throughout the majority of Orkney. So to talk about the specifics of what we went for, and I think it's quite clear Alex had a pretty good grasp of all this already, and I didn't really have to steer him too much towards this kind of thing. But this is a very Orkney-specific badge, the patch with the anchor that represents OSDEF, Orkney and Shetland Defences. And that designation came into being early in 1941, so it took a while. And every soldier in Orkney would have worn that, basically. And the thinking behind the design, originally, of the OSDEF logo, is the symbol of the Navy, the fouled anchor, as it's known. Red and blue are the colours of the Royal Artillery, the Regiment of Royal Artillery. So that was the thinking behind that design. Underneath that, the horizontal stripe, red and blue, that's the Royal Artillery colours. And this chap is, well, you might not say corporal, but he's a gunner, so he's actually a bombardier. And above that, the patch says Royal Artillery above that. So I did bring along an artefact for you. Here is an actual OSDEF divisional patch from the Second World War, so you can say you touched one of these. Sacred object. I've got about 20 of them. So, so hopefully I'll see that one again later. Yes. So that's what's going on with the patches there, and there's no shortage of photos available, and particularly on the Imperial War Museum website. If you go into the collection section on the IWM website, just put Orkney or Orkneys, as it is often represented, and quite often OSDEF is actually described as Orkneys and Shetlands defences. But so you can see, typical, not very high-res photo. We can see the OSDEF badges. Here's some gunners getting some instruction in aircraft recognition, and I picked this out because I can kind of see the hairstyle matching quite nicely. The old short back and sides, very similar to Alex's figure. And the uniforms, what they call the 1937 pattern uniform. And so Alex is spot on with that, as you can see. So some gunners there. And there are loads of, that's not so clear, but you can see the guys with the OSDEF badge there as well. And the bottom one there, that's at camp at Tormiston. So Maze Howe will be just out of shot there. And a really clear view of a nice Ofsted badge there. The Commander-in-Chief of all the Home Forces up for an inspection in 1943. And, let's come on. And, well, that photo cropped up in Alex's presentation, actually. These are the gaiters they wore. And there's a good example of them being worn for protection. Also stops stuff going into the top of your boots, particularly burning items. So, essential wear. So, yeah, so some of Alex's predecessors. This is from the Orkney Blast, so the Forces newspaper that came out from 1941 onwards. So I think this was from the Christmas 1941 edition. I've actually got it here, I'll dig it out in a moment. And what we see here is the Nissen Huttite going to search for food. If you look really closely, the Huttite is wearing the Ofsted badge. So Alex wasn't the first to represent this. So it's the little article is actually a kind of spoof archaeological report, and it states that Orkney was only discovered in 1987 by a passing a civilian pilot. So, and it said the whole place was completely buried in mud until discovered in 1987. So yes, I actually have that edition. I'll dig that out if you want to have a look at that. But so I think a fairly justifiable choice, really, and perfectly represented, I think, by Alex. So, and very glad to be asked to be involved. So thanks. So I'll just leave it there, I think.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think we're going to film the Q&A, if that's okay for folk, but bear in mind that it is being filmed, so, sorry, from the picture. Bearing in mind that it is being filmed, you're going to ask a question, so if somebody doesn't want to be filmed, we can wait until the end and turn it off at that point, but we'll leave it on for now. Okay, so has anybody got any questions for any of the panel? Bradley?
Yeah, I have a question for Alex. Like, if you wanted to get started with digital drawing, what software and hardware would you need?
Well, I just boom my
Okay. Yeah, I think if we just move the microphone around, that's going to be easier. And then actually, Alex, if you're going to ask for the next question, then rather than keep going back to me.
Yeah, I guess I never actually explained that I work on a massive graphics tablet. I would say you can get little tabletop tablets for drawing on that are not super expensive. And I had one of them up until probably about 10 years ago or something. I now have a screen that I actually physically draw on the screen, and it's just like drawing on paper. It's sort of amazing. But they are eye-wateringly expensive. Excuse me, but a little tabletop tablet, and there's a number of bits of software available. The other thing is if you own an iPad, or if you have an iPad, a pencil and Procreate, I think it costs about 10 quid, maybe 12 quid now, is amazing as well. It does everything that Photoshop does. Photoshop is still the industry leading application, I would say, but it's like a subscription service. It's the same way the whole world is going. You have to have a subscription, and it's quite expensive, but yeah, an iPad and Procreate will do the job very, very well, I would say.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do you ever go back to dissolving drawing with pencil and paper?
Yeah, not anywhere near as much as I ought to. If the question was missed, it was do I draw on paper and pens, analog, as they jokingly refer to it. I really don't. I mean, there's almost no point in the line of work that I'm in, because any of those changes, like I highlighted, that would come back from a client, you kind of have to start over again, and it's just not possible. But I really I'd sometimes do it just to sort of ground yourself a little bit again, and I do miss working with paper and pencils and pen and ink. I love ink. But yeah, it's done almost like as a hobby and something to kind of maybe warm up in the morning. I'll do it. It does become a problem when you really want to, or should you ever want to try and sell any of your artwork, because these don't really fundamentally exist. So you can't, they're only ever a reproduction of what I've done on my desk, and people have tried NFTs and that kind of thing, which was an absolute disaster. But yeah, that is a shame, not necessarily in terms of the monetary advantage in it, but just physically holding an illustration. I kind of miss that, and I have a few of my own things around the house, and I value them more than anything I ever produced digitally. So that tells you its own its own story, I think.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Question for Andrew. What material were they using?
What material were the uniforms made of?
The uniforms made what they call serge, S-E-R-G. It's like a kind of heavy wool-based fabric. It's very, very warm and a bit itchy. So, kind of almost like, I suppose, very heavy-duty felt. Yeah. So not radically different to some of those earlier.
What's it like to wear?
What's it like to wear?
I'm assuming you have one there.
I know it's I wish I do, yes. Well, I've got
Yeah, I was a kid.
Sorry, I'll take the microphone. Sorry.
Many, many moons ago, I was an army cadet, and that was pretty much the style of the uniform that we had, and it's equally very, very hot on a hot day, bloody useless in the cold, and if you got it wet, it was absolutely, it became very heavy, and no insulation quality at all, it was miserable. So, and as you said, itchy. Oh man, scratching my heart. Oh, anyway, for many moons.
Thank you. Any other questions for any of the panel? I've got a question for Martin, actually, if that's okay, because when I saw the characters, what I particularly liked to think of all of them was the fact that the character was holding the pin, and so you've got that directly linked back there to something we had actually found at the cairns, and I just felt that in the same way as, with Andy's guy with the badge, there felt like a real Orkney connection there, possibly, maybe more so than the other two, which possibly, obviously we've got the drawings of the girl, but I guess with the pin, Martin, have you found anything else? So you talked a little bit about the jewellery working when you did yours, but is there anything else in there that maybe if you were to do, I don't know, we talked a little bit about the idea of at some point having a Viking man, an Iron Age woman. What do you think, an Iron Age woman, for example, from the jewellery perspective, maybe would be showing?
I think probably layers in terms of textile is the thing for women, from the very small amount of burial evidence that we have, largely out with Orkney, it has to be said, from some parts of central Scotland and places like Alloa, Clackmannanshire, and places like that, where there have been more intact burials and even sometimes quite amazing survivals of fragments of textile interleaved with layers that imply they were metal jewellery worn on the body, but concealed as layers were worn over those areas. So must have been very much whatever mode she was in, you would see the relevant items of jewellery, etc. But the other thing would be beads, lots of glass beads, probably embroidered as well. Some of the grade of beads we have, we've all sorts, we've got quite large ones, multicoloured, polychromatic ones, not a million miles away from some of the Viking period ones that Colleen was showing, but there's also tiny, tiny blue and yellow beads that almost certainly are embroidered that we're finding lost in floors within the broch, within the houses, etc. So probably they've just come off as people are quite active about tasks and their activities, and so these things are probably stitched on and embroidered and maybe sometimes worn. And then the other thing would be lots of finger rings and toe rings, which we know from mine how they're wearing multiples of these things on the toes, and we know definitely females and males as well, from the famous severed hands from Brock of Gurness that had, I think, about 5 rings across 2 hands that were detached from the body. So yeah, there's plenty of evidence for the kind of personal adornment, and certainly in female as well as male. The annoying thing or the frustrating thing is that we don't have a clear sense of any sort of designation of what's male versus female, whether there were different items of costume that would be worn by men versus women, because you've got, you know, fleetingly small numbers of actual inhumations, whole inhumations with grave goods to indicate whether there are differences in terms of male and female burials, but there probably were.
Just very briefly, just to say that every single item that I showed in relation to the recreation of the figure is evidenced in Orkney. I used examples from all over the Scandinavian world, but it's part of the international cultural footprint, which is so very, very well represented in Orkney. So every single element of that is to be found here. So she is an Orcadian lady. Thank you.
But she's not wearing the Westness brooch.
No, there's only one Westness brooch. You can't have every mug wearing it.
Thank you. Any other questions from anybody? Oh, I'm not seeing any. I mean, just in kind of summing up then, I guess, just to say thank you very much to Alex especially for coming and giving us this kind of insight into your work. I mean, it's been absolutely fascinating. And those of us that just didn't see the Giddy Limit on a Thursday or a Wednesday or whichever day it comes out these days, you know, don't get a sense at all of the work that's there. And I can't wait to see some of the stuff that you kind of teased us with there. That's going to be fantastic. And just a huge thank you from the Society for doing the work with Andy and with Martin and with Colleen and with Nick. Because what was important to us when we were looking at designing the characters, or when we were talking about wouldn't it be good if we could have something that's a bit different than what we've already got, which mainly was the Ness work obviously we've done, but also the OAS logo. It was really important to us that what we came out with was credible. So we wanted it to be, you know, we didn't want to release it and then like within 20 minutes there's a debate going on Facebook or Twitter about whether or not this would actually have been right. That was really important for us, that it be as sort of evidence-based as it can be, and I think that the truth of that has come out in all of the characters. And like I say, the thing for me that I love about them is I think they've all got real character as characters. I mean, I love what you're saying, Alex, about the tilt of the head, because she is really looking at you. You know, you just get a sense that she's there, she's got staff, she's looking at you, and similarly with the others, they're really engaging with us as the viewer. So that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody, that's been involved in that. So just say thank you. That would be brilliant. Thank you.